Welcome to the Health Leader Forge, where today's health leaders help to forge the leaders of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mark Bonica, of the University of New Hampshire's Department of Health Management and Policy and the Northern New England Association of Healthcare Executives. Our website is healthleaderforge.org, where you can find information about subscribing to the podcast, links and information related to the episode, as well as our complete archives. Today's guest is Sam Shields, the Director of Operational Excellence at Dartmouth Hitchcock Health System. In his role as Director, Sam provides leadership and strategic planning for the Dartmouth Hitchcock Value Institute. He has oversight of performance management, the Project Management Office, and the Value Institute Learning Center. He's responsible for developing programs and partnerships to improve patient outcomes and drive the organizational culture of the largest system in New Hampshire. In this podcast, we talk about Sam's career, which began as a chemical engineer working in specialty chemicals. Through experiences in a variety of manufacturing and production roles, Sam became an expert in supply chain management and quality and performance improvement. Like many of my guests, Sam's road to serving in healthcare has been circuitous. When he joined the Dartmouth Hitchcock team in 2009 and returned again in 2013, he brought his extensive and diverse experience to bear on improving the functioning of the organization. I have produced two versions of this podcast, an extended version that includes our complete conversation, and an abridged version. You are listening to the extended version. If you'd like to listen to the abridged version, please see our website. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Don't forget to leave us feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you may be accessing this recording. Thanks for listening, and here is Sam Shields. Welcome to the Forge, Sam.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So you went to the University of Massachusetts and studied chemical engineering. What brought you to UMass and why chemical engineering?
Well, I grew up in the Massachusetts, Boston area, and when I was in high school, I really loved math and science, was good at it. My father was an engineer, a mechanical engineer. My grandfather before him was a metallurgical engineer, so it sort of ran in the family. But I also wanted to sort of, I guess, forge my own path, right, and go and do something different. I really loved chemistry, and so I really took a liking to pursuing chemical engineering. And back then in high school, I really didn't know anything about what it might be, but it sounded pretty cool. So the rest is history. And I ended up at UMass because it was a state school. They had a really good program for chemical engineering. Pretty small program. I mean, it's a big school, but there were only about 20 to 25 of us in the graduating class. So wow. It was kind of the best of both worlds. You get to know all of your classmates, but you've got this huge university there with a lot of resources to help you along. So it was a great experience.
Yeah. And UMass Engineering is a top quality program.
Very good. Right? Yeah, very good program.
Yeah. My daughter happens to be in there right now doing
nice. Very good.
Anyway, coming out of college, you went to work at Cabit Corporation in Pampa, Texas. That's a long way from Amherst.
It sure is.
How did you wind up in Texas?
So when I was in college, I did an internship with a professor there. And that really was a jumping point for me to look for an internship with different companies. And so I was lucky enough during my senior year to get an internship with Cabit Corporation in Billerica at their technical center. So I worked with them for a summer, and then I got to do a little bit of work over the winter session for them as well. And then coming out of college, they were one of my job offers, along with a couple of others. All of them were outside of Massachusetts area. I was going to have to leave home, but what was important to me was to get my career started and get some experience under my belt. So they had a great offer for me to go to the Texas Panhandle and work in one of their plants as a production engineer, and so that's what I did. So in the same week, I got a new job. I think I got engaged to my wife, and then I moved. So it was all at once. Yeah.
What is a production engineer?
So essentially, as a production engineer, for me, it was you're assigned to a couple of different production lines at the facility, and you own basically efficiency, quality, cost around that production line end to end. And so as a chemical engineer, it's really focused on process and process improving. So process improvement is fundamental to it. And so that's really what my job was overseeing, making sure that we were making high quality materials on a consistent basis, and that we were continuously sort of innovating as well to make sure we were delivering value to the customer as well.
Now, was this training that you got during your time at UMass, or was this something you learned on the job?
Sort of a combo. I mean, I think it's funny, a lot of chemical engineers, I think, when you're in chemical engineering school, you learn a lot about fluids and gases and processes around those. And then when you go out into industry, it's like 90% solids, and I was doing solids.
Okay.
So, there's some translation you have to do there. But the cornerstone around optimizing processes and the thought process around that and really breaking it down and looking at each different component was obviously transferable. I think what I had to learn about was how to lead teams, how to manage, how to work around the soft skills that you don't necessarily get when you're doing your undergraduate degree, and learning all of those aspects were what I had to do on the job.
So in that first role, were you a supervisor right away, or you?
I was not, but that's where I started with my continuous improvement experience right there. So straight out of the gate, they assigned me a few continuous improvement teams.
Okay.
So Cabit Corporation was very much into total quality management, and that means getting employees at the front lines engaged, identifying opportunities for improvement, and doing PDSAs around those improvements. So I was leading teams across the facility, doing that kind of work, and that was my first foray into quality improvement as well.
Okay.
So I learned it really early on, and it became sort of foundational of how I thought about things and my philosophy, leading into my philosophy around leadership as well.
Okay, so you were a leader of teams, but not a supervisor at that point.
Correct.
Okay, how was that as a young person, brand new out of school? I assume the people you were leading on these teams were more senior to you.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, these are guys and women in their 40s, 50s with a lot of experience.
Uh-huh.
And so if you're going to be effective, you can't come in thinking that you're the snot-nosed kid out of college knowing all the answers, right? That's not going to get you anywhere. It was really trying to bring out their knowledge and making sure that you can bring out the best ideas from them and engage them in the right way so that they can work around doing these PDSAs and helping to support the overall organizational goal. So it was a challenge, and a lot of early failures, and then leading to successes by learning from those failures, no doubt.
What did Cabit do to kind of help you build the skills you needed to lead those teams?
Cabot did a lot. I mean, this was in the 90s, and there was a pretty formal training around team building, around quality improvement work. We were partnering with some of our suppliers like Xerox and others around root cause analysis. So there was a lot of training that was done in order to build up these teams. And the facility I was at was really dedicated to that. The general manager was dedicated to it. And so I would go to training around root cause analysis, but also with the teams, with the operators and the folks from maintenance and across the organization as well. So we're all learning together, and so having a singular vision around what continuous improvement really meant to us and what it really looked like for us as well, which was really important.
What is root cause analysis?
So root cause analysis is really just, the reason it's called sort of root is, if you think about a weed growing is the symptoms of a problem, the root is really that core root of what's really causing the problem. And if you can eliminate that cause, then you really eliminate the other symptoms and other things of the problem. And I think all organizations struggle with, are you dealing with the symptoms, or are you dealing with the root cause of the problem? And how do you do it in a methodical, disciplined way so that you really are eliminating the problem?
So the people that were on the teams you were working in, these were machine operators, or
they were chemical plant operators. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it's a continuous process in the chemical plant that they're monitoring different areas. They might be packing out in certain areas, moving materials around, that sort of thing. But these are the guys doing the work. These are the guys monitoring the process. We were really big into statistical process control as well. So they had control charts across the plant. Some of them were automated, some of them were manual. So really it was all around monitoring the process, looking for variability, for special causes and variability, these kinds of things, again, which kind of ties into the Six Sigma aspect of it. So under that guise, back then it was total quality management, which later sort of morphed into Lean Six Sigma.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, so it was TQM, or total quality management, that was what it was called at the time.
Yeah.
And you had training in that. Looking back on those skill sets, has a lot changed in that, in the approaches?
No, I don't think the approaches have changed that much. The tenets are the same too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's getting people involved that are doing the work and bringing to bear their knowledge around it is still so important. It's still about eliminating waste. I think, I mean, in my opinion, it seems like that all of those things sort of came together, and then we call them different things, but they're still foundationally the same. But we have added new tools to it as well. So if you think about the lean side, that's really around eliminating waste and identifying the 8 wastes, and that was coming about while we were doing TQM in the 90s as well. Of course, Japan had been doing it for a while, but I mean, it all sort of came together, I think, into Lean Six Sigma eventually.
Okay. So you were at Cabit at this plant from 95 to 2007. And
Correct.
At some point you were promoted to operations manager. What is that role? And how did
So
that come about?
yeah, so I actually passed through a couple of other roles on the way there. So I was a production engineer for 4 or 5 years, and then it was one of those things where I knew I wanted to get into management, but how do you get into management if you don't have any experience in management? So what I started to do was work as a shift foreman, covering as a shift foreman. So that started to get me supervisory experience. I did that for about a year and then moved into a production manager job, did that for a couple of years, and then became operations manager. As production manager, it was really just strictly on the production side. When you add operations manager to that, it's all the production side of the house, which is all the operators and inventory incoming for raw materials. And then as operations manager, it adds warehousing and shipping and receiving as well. So total is about 80 people or so.
Wow.
As operations manager for the facility.
So what was it like making that transition into supervision?
It was difficult. Again, it was sort of the same thing as what I experienced as a new engineer coming in, where you have a lot of folks that have a lot more experience than you, right? And it's balancing out to make sure that you sort of have humility around your approach and are listening to your people, because they've been there, done that in many cases. And so, yeah, it was a transition from you're a colleague and now you report to me as well. So it can be delicate, but it's also, you've got to understand where you want to go and be authentic, I think, and have integrity about it. And so if you sort of keep on that path with what the things are that need to be core for good leadership, I think you can do well.
So you earned an MBA, I assume, while you were down in Texas at West Texas A&M.
Correct.
Why the MBA? Why not, say, an advanced degree in engineering?
Well, I started the MBA. I guess if I look back, I never thought that I was going to go technical longer term for my career. I had the opportunity to go and get my PhD when I was at UMass in polymer science, and I was ready to go and work. I didn't want to keep going to school, so even at that point, I had made the choice to move that direction. My father got an MBA after getting his mechanical engineering degree, so I had a lot of discussions with him. So it just seemed like the natural fit to add that component to it. And certainly the pieces that you learn in your MBA around not only sort of business processes, but also around HR and strategy and planning and all of those different pieces seemed to meld well with what I wanted to do for my career longer term. So I made the commitment to do that.
You were promoted to Global Supply Chain Manager for Cabit in 2004. And
That's
that
right.
brought you back up to Massachusetts.
That did. That's correct. Yeah.
So tell me about that position. How did that come about?
So that was
What
was a new position that was created within the business, the specialty chemical business, and that was really basically two pieces to that. The first was core ownership of the sales and operations planning process for the business. And so that's a process that really looks at optimizing the demand plan and the supply plan, and then marrying those together so that the business can execute against what they're trying to do. So that was one component of it, is running that process, continuously improving that process globally. The second component of the role was building out and implementing what we called business rules back then. And business rules were really a way to trying to optimize lead times, inventory levels, and service across your customer base. And so if you think about different customers that a business might have, what we ended up doing was segmenting those customers into platinum, gold, and silver customers, and each level, depending on what kind of customer they were, had a different level of service that we wanted to guarantee to those customers. And that could mean minimum order quantities they could do. It also meant what they could have for lead times as well, and then that led into how much safety stock we'd be carrying for those different types of customers to make sure that we had a certain level of fill rate for them as well.
So you're using a couple of terms. So let me say, lead time?
What is lead time? So lead time is basically the time from the order to delivery.
Okay.
People can define it in different ways, but it's fundamentally that. That was how we defined it. Yeah. So from the time that you call in and say, I need this product, what is the lead time we're going to give you in order to deliver that product to you?
And so if I was a platinum customer, you would have a faster lead time.
Yeah, what we did is in sort of the back end, as we set up our inventory levels, we would set those to make sure that we had a certain service level target on that, right? So many cases what we said with those customers is a 2-day lead time. So that means that we're going to have to carry a certain level of what we'd call safety stock in order to support that lead time going forward, which includes, variability, right? So if they have variability in demand, you've got to set your target so that it takes that into account as well, so that 99% of the time you've got enough inventory to satisfy their need.
So there's an assumption there that you're going to be able to make some new product, but you'll also have some product on hand just in case they call.
That's right, and then so this is and this is the other piece that drives back into the sales and operations planning process. Is then that has to drive what you're doing for scheduling and production across the organization, and then also where you're going to put your material, right? So I had 4 different facilities across the world that were making different kinds of material, and you've got to really look at your total network of where you're going to place all that material to make sure that you can maintain your lead times that you've promised to your customers.
Wow, okay. So in 2007, you left Cabit after 12 years and made your first foray up here to Lebanon, New Hampshire, where we are actually sitting today. So though the first company you actually were involved with was Timkin Aerospace Corporation. What is Timkin and what did you do for them?
Yeah, that's correct. So I left Timkin and moved my family up here. And with Timkin, it was a sort of materials manager / supply chain manager role. Timkin is, at that time actually, was still a combined company. They've since split up into 2 different separate companies. At the time, though, they had a large aerospace business and then also a steel business as well. And so the facility up here in Lebanon was all aerospace materials. It was ball bearings that go into anything from a missile to the Osprey helicopter, plane, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and so as a supply chain manager, it was a very similar role to what I had at Cabit, where it wasn't as global, but it's still a core portion of that role was leading the sales and operations planning process for that side of the business relative to the Lebanon facility, and then also I added in purchasing, contracting as well to that side as well.
So how was, in particular, quality management different between the organizations?
Yeah, great question. So the nature of those 2 businesses is quite a bit different in that when you're talking about Timkin Aerospace, that's a military spec quality that needs to be maintained, and also FAA certifications, right? So at Cabot, we had a really strong quality improvement program, but it wasn't, if I think about it, that versus Timkin's was on steroids for obvious reasons, right? So there are a lot more checks and documentations needing to be done all through the process of manufacturing for Timkin because, it's going into helicopters, it's going into jet engines, selling to people like GE and Rolls-Royce and others. And so maintaining of standards was really critically important for that.
So how is the culture of the organizations different? So you'd spent a long time at Cabot. Mm-hmm. You made a transition from one plant down in Texas back up to the Bill Ricca plant where you had done your internship. So you had some familiarity, and now you've moved to a third organization. How is the culture different between the 3?
So that's an interesting question. I think if I think about Cabot, there was a strong continuous improvement culture. But we didn't call anything Lean or Six Sigma, and we barely even called it total quality management as well. But there was a focus on, I think, being more entrepreneurial around it, and grabbing on something and driving it and improving it. Timkin was a bit more command and control and a bit more old school in that regard, but I think that also comes from the supplies that they were having to deliver to places like GE and others like that, where you really can't take on variation. You've got to be delivering at spec every time, all the time. So it was a little bit different in that regard. Timkin also, too, was very much into the Lean Six Sigma approach.
Okay.
So they were really trying to look at value streams, total value streams, and optimizing around that value stream. And Cabit really had not taken that approach in their journey. So in that regard, it was different from the standpoint of how they were approaching continuous improvement as well.
So you're mentioning now Lean Six Sigma. Was that term actually used at Timkin at that
It was, point? Yes.
And was that your first exposure to that?
I mean, it wasn't my first exposure. It was my first exposure to an organization that was calling it what it was and really trying to focus on implementing it as it is in terms of the sort of classic sense of Lean Six Sigma, where you're starting with value streams and looking at the waste and identifying the waste, and then using a lot of visual management boards and what we call Kanban, so visual cues to show where the demand and flow is in the organization. The other thing I would point out too is these are very different manufacturing processes. So Cabit is a continuous flow process with reactors that are running basically 24/7. Timkin was very much more a job shop, so the material worked through different cells across the site. It starts out as a metal bar, it gets machined down into a bearing, and then there's all kinds of finishing steps around that. And so it's not a continuous process flow.
Okay.
That's what you want to get to, but that's not what you have inherently in the process. So the challenges were far greater when you're dealing with something like the Timkin production process around how do you visualize flow, see it, understand how it's doing, and what the mechanisms are to control it as well. Whereas with Cabit, you were sitting at a reactor control board and monitoring and seeing how it was working and monitoring continuously the different inputs to it. So very different manufacturing process.
So help me understand, because I'm not a manufacturing guy. So when you say continuous flow, it's a chemical process that's sort of continuously going.
Correct.
And there's something coming out at the end.
Correct. On the front end, you've got natural gas, air, oil, all being sent into a reactor. You manipulate flows on all of those that creates different properties of the material that's coming out, but it's continuously flowing. On the Timkin side, you've got metal bars that you got to slice down, then you make them into a circle, a ring basically. Right. Then you've got to add in the interior parts, you got to do finishing steps on it. You also have to basically bake it at different temperatures to harden it. So a lot more detailed steps, again, that you can't just sit back and say on a computer monitor, where's everything at? I mean, ideally you would, but it gets a lot more difficult to do that.
So the difference is that there are actually like pause points between each step.
And that's exactly where you start to apply Lean Six Sigma around, these pockets of no flow or extra inventory or excess inventory, and trying to maximize the flow through the organization so that you can speed time to delivery for your customer, while at the same time maintaining quality, right? Because you're doing quality checks all the way through it as well.
And you use the phrase Kanban. What does that mean?
So Kanban is basically a visual cue. It's a Japanese term for a visual cue that says there's work that can be taken. So in the simplest form in Timkin, a Kanban was where at the beginning of a cell there would be blocks on the floor, squares on the floor, and if there's material in the square, that means you can work on that material. That's a simple Kanban.
Okay.
Right? So the operator would know if there's something in that box, I need to grab it and start to work on it.
And you use the phrase value stream.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So value stream, the example we use in the Value Institute is, and I think it bodes well to thinking it through, is sort of like a grocery store, right? When you're shopping in the grocery store, you see vegetables and everything on the shelves, but the total value stream is starting at the farm all the way through to the delivery to that grocery store. So when we talk about the value stream, it's all of those processes and steps in between. It's picking the fruit, it's delivering it to the warehouse distributes it, and then it ends up in the grocery store. And we talk a lot about, too, quality at the source, right? So if the fruit on the grocery store floor is in great shape, that means that we're really taking care of the fruit early on, all the way through the process. But if it's bruised, where are we missing our quality at the source piece, right? So are we bouncing it around? Are we not boxing it properly? Is it getting bounced around in the trucks? How is it getting bruised on the way through the value stream? And so trying to fix the problems early on in the value stream becomes a big premise around Lean Six Sigma improvement.
In your role at Timkin, you were overseeing 3 departments. What were they, and how many people roughly were in those?
Yeah, so I was managing 3 departments: purchasing, planning, and scheduling. The purchasing group, I think it was around 10 to 12 for each group at that time. And that was this was the first time I'd had folks in different departments reporting directly to me. In my global supply chain manager role, it was more dotted lines. So I had demand planning for different regions and supply planning for different regions, but they weren't solid line to me. It was very much a matrixed organization. So this was a little bit different model at Timkin than what I had had before, which was great because, of course, they're directly reporting into me, and so we could align on what we were doing and where we were going pretty easily.
So what was it like to make the jump from being a direct supervisor to now being a supervisor of supervisors, or moving into a manager role where you're now supervising supervisors?
Yeah, so that's a great point. It's one of those, and I think about it, it's one of those turning points, right, where you're an individual contributor, you're a manager, and now you're a manager of managers, right? So you've got to think more about accountability and think a bit higher level of, how are you going to hold your specific managers accountable for their in particular areas, and what are their goals and metrics that you're going to be having them drive at. So it was really trying to take one step up and develop the right scorecards so that each of those managers knew what they were accountable for and what we were driving at. So it was a bit of a transition, but I was excited about it. It was something that I got to do a little bit of as a global supply chain manager, but it wasn't as direct as it was in this role.
So in 2008, you left Timkin to briefly be the vice president of operations for Momenta Inc. in Northwood, which is, I actually drove through on the way up here from UNH. So what happened with Momenta?
So this is one of those examples of a time in my career where I took a risk. I decided to leave Timkin to go to Momenta to be their VP of Ops. And the promise was, being able to get partial ownership and a large market opportunity and do all of these great things. And so it was a risk-reward type decision, and I really hadn't taken any risks in my career to that point. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to try and do this. It's completely different. It's a consumer products company. Okay. Most of the supplies were made in China, so it was really an outsourced model. And what ended up happening, though, was I looking back, I don't think I asked enough questions on the front end to really know where the organization was at, because within 2 months, this was at the time of the financial crisis that it was going through. So we ended up having to go into bankruptcy. So, I was only there for 4 or 5 months before moving into bankruptcy, and they had to basically slash staff significantly. And I think they've managed to come out of that, but it was an important lesson for me, I think, around the risk-reward jumping in. But looking back, too, I don't regret it, because it helped me end up at Dartmouth Hitchcock, which is where I went from there.
So what did you learn in that process, you think?
I think, so a couple of things. On the front end is really understand and know what you're getting into. I think I was so excited about the possible upsides and positives of it that it made me minimize, in my mind, the possible negative aspects to it. Yeah. And so I got, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of blinders on around that. So that's probably the most important one, is to really take a balanced look at any opportunity and really go in with full eyes open. On the other side, too, I did, even though it wasn't very long, I did get some great experience in, I'd already been working on doing some outsourcing, again, with my global supply chain role. But it was much more poignant because it was a pretty small company as well. So I got some direct experience working with suppliers in China, and also direct experience with distribution models of warehouses. I mean, as a global supply chain manager, I had a little bit of work with it, but not at such a direct level with sort of managing the contracts and working with them at the ground floor as well. So I think with any experience you get positives and negatives, and you get learning from it. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you had great preparation to go to that role, but it's an interesting thing to see how things kind of work out sometimes and don't, and good to learn from it. So as you mentioned, you left Momenta and came to Dartmouth Hitchcock for the first time in 2009. And I've done a few interviews here at Dartmouth Hitchcock with some other executives, but for listeners who haven't had the opportunity to listen to those, and before we kind of specifically talk about your role, let's talk a little bit about Dartmouth Hitchcock to give a little bit of background. So what is Dartmouth Hitchcock, and what makes it unique?
So it's the only level 1 trauma center in New Hampshire, the largest hospital in New Hampshire. It's 396 beds, 9,000 plus employees. Got about 28 ORs here at the main site. And then in terms of affiliates, I don't know what our total count is, but it's New London Hospital, Mount Ascutney. I think there's 8 to 10 now affiliates that we have, including the Visiting Nurse Association as well. So as a total system, it touches almost 2 million people across New England. So a large healthcare system. What makes it unique, in my opinion, is its location. It's probably the only academic medical center that is not in a large city, right? Which presents opportunities and challenges. I mean, I think one of the challenges is then, getting talent in a pipeline to come up here is always a challenge for us. But I also think one of the advantages is we've developed a culture here that's, I think, very quality focused and patient focused as well. And it's a culture too that I guess maybe it's sort of the Yankee ingenuity background as well, but it's really a get it done attitude. And this place is pretty amazing when it gets focused on doing something and aligned on it. It can really move mountains as well. So I think it's pretty unique in that regard.
So what did you come to Dartmouth to initially do?
So I started in supply chain at Dartmouth, and what happened was as Momenta was moving over into bankruptcy, I found the opportunity up here through a colleague I had at Timkin, who suggested I apply because they were looking for supply chain professionals. And so what happened was there was a new director of supply chain for Dartmouth Hitchcock who was really looking for people with industrial experience that could bring that knowledge and that process mindset to a healthcare organization. So first role was inventory and logistics manager, which meant I had the offsite warehouse, I had distribution of all supplies and linens, I had all of the OR inventory, I had the print shop. So pretty wide swath of different groups, and that was really great because it exposed me to anywhere from the OR to the med-surg units to the offsite warehouse, and having a fundamental a warehouse that I was running as well. So it was pretty great.
So was this your first experience with healthcare, or you had been exposed to it at all before?
Other
than as a patient?
Yeah, I had no experience before at all. So it was my first foray into healthcare.
And services as well, because you've been
very true.
manufacturing.
That's very true. Yeah,
Okay.
That's exactly right. It was much more on the service side. So there was definitely a learning curve associated with that. But I think too, because I had worked in specialty chemicals and aerospace, and then a little bit of a foray into consumer products, I had already started to sort of internalize the thought processes around how do I shift gears in order to be able to translate what I'm doing. And it becomes much more about process than sort of industry, right? And so what are the fundamental processes around supply chain don't really change. You're just moving different stuff, right? And so I was able to bring that over into the role and begin to really build a solid team and be able to really make some great improvements.
So what was it like coming into a hospital? I mean, I know my experience as we talked about my career in the military. I mean, I kind of got dumped into a practice manager role as a brand new second lieutenant.
Yep.
And I remember standing in the hospital, and people were talking, and I knew they were talking in English, but but I had no idea what they were saying. Yes. So I can only imagine it. Was that your experience? Or
yeah, no, it definitely was. I mean, there was a steep learning curve on understanding and learning the jargon and the 3-letter acronyms, no doubt. And I remember struggling with that early on. I think the other thing too, and again, I've only worked for Dartmouth Hitchcock in terms of healthcare, but it just seems to me that relationships and your credibility is much more important in healthcare. I mean, credibility is always important, but I think you really I recognize early on, you really have to prove yourself and show that you're adding value in order to really create the right partnerships and work with folks. Again, I guess maybe it's back to your point around as a service, right? I'm providing a service, and what value am I bringing to you, and how am I delivering value to you? And so going in with that mindset is really important. And then delivering on it is equally important, right? Is to be able to show the folks how you're adding value and what you're doing to help them in order to achieve their goals and what they're trying to do every day.
Was there a strong sense of people were trying to evaluate that about you and your role?
No, I mean, I think I think that's true for true for anybody new in the role. That's going to happen no matter what. I just think that for Dartmouth Hitchcock, in my experience, it was you need to build the relationships and add the value along the way in order to create the right partnership so that you can move together with your big customers, right? So I think about the work that we did with peri-op services, a lot of the work we did with the nurses on the nursing floors around linen and supplies and that kind of stuff, and just really trying to create strong partnerships with those folks so that you could move together in the things you're trying to get done.
So you have all this experience in global supply chain management and process improvement. How is it bringing that? So as you said, you've made this transition. You had made that transition now through 3 different industries.
Yeah.
Here's a 4th.
Yep.
But a pretty radical change because it's not manufacturing
right.
anymore. So what was that process like for you to make that adjustment?
So I think the translation of sort of global supply chain and the fundamentals was less hard because it's the same sort of network, just on a smaller scale, right? So I still had a supply location that was distributing product across the multiple locations like the hospital, and then later we added the outpatient surgery center. And then from there it was further distributed across the organization with individuals with doing carts and that sort of stuff for inventory. So it was, the fundamentals remain the same, again, just with the scale different. I think my bigger challenge was more on the transition with the healthcare pieces and understanding the specific needs and who the customers were, learning some of the ins and outs of how the OR functions and how med-surg functions and different floors and all of the different specialty pieces around all of those. Because what was interesting is, if I think back to my time as a global supply chain manager, and you think about these different customers and segmenting the customers, we certainly didn't segment customers in terms of importance, but each of them, when you think about a large healthcare organization, each of the departments is really kind of its own business. And in many cases, they have their own culture, they have their own norms, and of course the business model can be a bit different as well. So it really was thinking about who are my different businesses out there and the customers, and how are their needs different across the organization, because again, an outpatient clinic runs a lot different than the OR. So really trying to translate that and figure out what are the critically important to quality for those individual groups.
So it's not just like lead times and inventory now, it's different priorities.
Correct.
For these organizations.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Where was Dartmouth Hitchcock in terms of quality management when you arrived with respect to the manufacturing sector? I mean, obviously there was somebody here that valued that insight.
Yeah, but at the time, my exposure, I didn't get exposed to a lot of the quality management systems, sort of the classic ones that I would think about in terms of quality and patient safety at that time, because we were so focused over on the supply chain side. Certainly, we got involvement from them when we were working with particular vendors and we had issues with different supplies. That was where I would have the most direct linkage with them, and I could help with that. And we had a lot of great success with working with vendors around that. You asked earlier about root cause analysis, and really, so in my experience with aerospace and specialty chemicals, and being able to ask the right questions of suppliers and drive at what needs to be done right now in order to help us with correcting quality issues was important. And my time in Timkin, working with places like GE and Sikorsky and those kinds of places, if you're not meeting quality, you really need to fix it quick, and you know what kinds of questions you're going to get. And so I was able to bring that here as well, around the discipline around being able to fix things, and then how to drive action with those vendors as well. So it was good.
What was most rewarding about this foray into healthcare for you?
Well, there were so many opportunities. I think the groups had done a great job with getting to a certain level of performance, and then myself and others were brought in as well with other industry experience. We were able to just take it to the next level. So one of the first things we did in the offsite warehouse was, and I did this with the whole warehouse team, was we redesigned the layout of the warehouse so that we had A, B, C items, right? So the A items are the ones that are moving on a regular basis every day that you're picking and shipping. And so we revised the layout of the warehouse to do one pass flow so that they could run through the warehouse in one pass and pick everything they need and put it on the truck, right? And so it's real impact to the folks on the floor and their daily jobs for improving their work. And so there were so many different opportunities to do things like that. It was really satisfying, and people could feel that in their work right away as well. So that was probably the best part of it.
So you actually left Dartmouth Hitchcock in 2011 to join a company called LabSphere. And I think we can let listeners know that everything works out okay in the end, because you do ultimately come back to
happy
Dartmouth
ending.
Hitchcock.
Yes.
Happy ending,
Yeah.
Obviously, because we're sitting here.
Yep.
But what drew you to LabSphere, and what kind of organization is it?
Yeah, so LabSphere is a light measurement company. It's part of a larger company called Halma. And I was drawn to them because I made the decision to go back out into industry, and it wasn't something where I was really looking, but the opportunity came along, and it was 10 minutes away from my house, and it's a larger company with lots of growth opportunities, and so they wanted me to come and run their supply chain and their manufacturing group. And so I decided to leave Dartmouth Hitchcock and go there. But as I said, it was one smaller company, part of a broader sort of holding company called Halma. And it was light measurement. So they make light measurement spheres that are used by anybody from your large aerospace companies to your academic universities as well. And so, again, it was another exposure to a completely different industry. Most of their work is custom work, so building out fully customized systems based on the needs of the specs provided by the customer. There are some pieces of their business that are more the standardized, but the bulk of it was really custom work.
So that's different from the other manufacturing companies you had worked for in the past that were making something that to a particular spec, but it's
there was
quantities of something.
Yeah, that's exactly
chemicals
right.
Or ball bearings.
Yeah, the interesting thing though is even at Timkin early on, we were still doing a fair number of customized chemical grades for depending on the application. So we could do we had special grades for Xerox and some special grades for other companies back then. So I was still exposed to the customization, not to this extent, though, to your point, right? Where it's not only a job shop, but it's a full customized delivery in that job shop as well. And so not every single, but a lot of the builds you're doing are completely unique. And so that represents challenges around making sure that you're going to meet your delivery times. What are you going to do with excess inventory? Because if you have excess inventory, it's a one and done, right? You're not going to make that again. So what are you doing with all the extra parts and pieces as well? So yeah, it created other challenges there. So much more, you needed a high level of control around the engineering process and the quality standards around that, and then a lot more work around making sure that we had things lined up in order to be able to meet the tight deadlines in many cases for delivery of the work.
So you were at LabSphere for about 2 years, and then you did come back to Dartmouth Hitchcock. What was the opportunity that made you decide to make the jump back?
Yeah, so this is a big turning point for me actually in my career. This is the first time that I actually made the decision to leave a job and go into another role based on what I really wanted to do, what I really loved to do. Up until this time, I had really made my decisions on what I think I should do. Right, I should go for a management job. I should gain global experience. I should go into another industry. Right, this was where, what do I really love to do? And so after I had left Dartmouth Hitchcock, they started up the Value Institute. And it was the place where, it's continuous improvement. It's black belts working on continuous improvement work and process improvement. And, back my very early stages of my career, was the work I was doing, and I always loved it. And so it really was the decision made to go and do something I love rather than something I should do.
So you came back as a senior value performance specialist.
Correct.
What is that?
Yes, the titles are not great. It's basically a senior consultant. So okay. It's a black belt senior consultant that is here. And in terms of the role, the way the role works in the Value Institute is you spend about 10% of your time developing and delivering curriculum, usually in our yellow belt and green belt programs, but we also do our essential elements workshops. Then 20 to 30% of your time is spent on coaching green belts that go through our green belt program. And then the rest of your time could be consulting work or could be leading large-scale projects. And the consulting work could be helping people think through their strategic plans, helping them get projects off the ground, but then also, again, helping to execute large-scale projects across the organization.
So you've used the karate metaphor here, the black belt and green belt. And so
yes.
For folks who are not familiar with Lean Six Sigma,
correct.
What does that mean?
So,
what are you saying when you say black belt?
So black belt are basically you've reached the level of knowing, understanding, and using the tools of Lean Six Sigma so that you're considered an expert, right? Okay. And so there's different tiers of it. So white belt means you basically just know that it exists and you've had a little bit of exposure to it. Yellow belt is the next level up where you've participated on a green belt level team. You know how to do small PDSAs, which are Plan, Do, Study, Act, so small tests of change, and so you've had some exposure and training on those tools. Green belt is another level up from that, which is you have led or can lead projects that might be typically just within your department, and you can lead a team through that project, a team typically consisting of yellow belts. Okay. And then black belt is the next level up. There is one more level above that, just to throw more karate terms at you, yeah. Is the master black belt, which is considered sort of the high-level expert. Okay. There's not many master black belts around.
And what is the role of the master black belt?
So the master black belt is really, that's senior executive coaching, defining curriculum across the organization. Coaching black belts is a big piece of that, coaching and mentoring black belts. And really, they're sort of the one that people could go to with all sorts of different issues, problems to help them think through as a black belt or green belt. So really they're sort of, they call them a sensei, right? So again, a Japanese term, but yeah, it's sort of the highest level of expertise around that.
Okay. How does one become each of these levels?
Yeah, so there's actually a number of different ways. I mean, there's a lot of different online yellow belt classes available. We offer here at Dartmouth Hitchcock an in-person yellow belt as well as an online yellow belt course. So there's a difference between being trained and being certified as well in any of these. So yellow belt, you can do the training in a number of different places. In order to get certified through the Value Institute, we ask that folks either take part in a green belt class or they do small tests of change on their own, or they take part in what we call rapid process improvement workshops. So, and it's also called an RPIW. So that's a 5-day workshop that's really focused on one particular area in the organization, and we go through what we call our DMAIC process, which is what we teach in the Value Institute. And that's our Lean Six Sigma methodology. And so people can take part in one of those RPIWs in order to get certified. And then the green belt as well. You go to green belt training, and there's a lot of different places that offer green belt training. Again, the Value Institute offers classes, and ours is completely dedicated to really just healthcare related field. But you do the 5-day class, and then after you lead a green belt project, then you become certified. We also have an alternative for people external to the organization if they want to get certified as a green belt, where they can do a case study that takes us through. It's actually, our example is from some of our sepsis work that we did here as an organization, that they can do the case study on the sepsis work.
And then black belt is after green. How do you?
Black belt. So we don't offer black belt training at the Value Institute. So we have a few different organizations that we recommend people use to get certified. One is the American Society for Quality. Villanova also has a really good program. And another one we use is called Morsteam, which is a company that does a lot of Lean Six Sigma training as well. So we do certify black belts in the Value Institute. And what that means is you would go and get trained by one of these outside organizations. And then in order to be certified through the Value Institute, you will have had to coach a couple of green belts as well as deliver some of our curriculum. So learn and deliver the curriculum over the course of time as well.
So here at the Value Institute, you actually offer this training to employees of Dartmouth Hitchcock and also outsiders.
Correct.
So I could come conceivably and take one of your classes.
That's correct.
And
yeah.
Get certified all the way up to green belt.
Up to green belt.
Through here.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we just started offering external sales of our classes last November.
Neat. And then master black belt, how does one become a master black belt, a certified master black belt?
Yeah,
is there such a thing as a certification?
There is. I mean, if you're going to get the designation of master black belt, you'll have to earn the certification, and the bar is just even higher, right? So the other portion of the black belt certification I didn't mention is you really need to have a portfolio of projects that you can show that you've accomplished as well, right? So then going to master black belt, again, there's a few programs out there that we would recommend people go to. Again, Morsteam has a really nice master black belt program. ASQ has a program as well. But you have to have a portfolio of projects, you have to take an exam, and then there's typically written and oral interviews to make sure that you are a very strong subject matter expert. And these are questions around how would you handle this situation, what would you do in this case,
right.
And so the bar is significantly higher for a master black belt.
Okay, so you came back, kind of backing up again. You came back as a senior value performance specialist. So at that point, were you a black belt?
I was not. This is one of those things where I had never really just taken it upon myself to go and finish any kind of black belt certification. I got my green belt certification with Cabit in the 90s, and I didn't pursue it any further than that. I never really, saw the need to. I was always using the tools and applying that thought process, but I had never formalized it. So it was one of the first things I did in my role, and that was actually part of my first year goal, was to get certified as a black belt. And so I did. I did it through American Society for Quality.
And so in this role that you took on coming back to Dartmouth, it seems like you had moved away from supply chain now specifically and more generally into quality. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
What was that transition like for you then?
It was refreshing. It was great, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that drove me back to do this kind of work was I had been doing productions for so long, right? And there's a certain level of tension with production and trying to get product out and all of those things, and that level of tension too with supply chain. So the opportunity to go and do things different from that. So, doing some more, working more with clinicians and even working with finance, or it was just great to have this broad scope of possible work. Was really exciting, and be able to get out of just the supply chain piece.
Right. And in fact, one of the projects that you worked on was the Sepsis project,
correct,
right? Which actually made national news based on the work that was done here at the hospital.
Yep.
Definitely outside of supply chain.
Yes, it was.
So
no doubt.
So tell us a little bit about what is sepsis and why is it a problem that the hospital is concerned about?
Yeah, so first off, what is sepsis? So sepsis is really, here's the non-clinical person describing sepsis, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
I mean, essentially it's where
non-clinical person describe it to another non-clinical
person. This will be great.
Yeah.
So essentially, though, it's where your body is fighting an infection, and in order to really fight the infection, it starts to shut down other pieces of your body in order to be able to go after this infection that's attacking you. So it's sort of a full body shock against that. And there's what we call bundles that are that have been developed that really, if they're used at the right time, can really stop the onset of sepsis. And so that includes fluids and antibiotics and testing a lactate and testing blood cultures, right? So these are the bundles that firm up around it, and they have what's called a 3-hour and a 6-hour bundle. So that's a little bit about sepsis. It's a huge problem across the U.S. and I can't remember the numbers, but it's millions of people that are affected by this every year that die from sepsis. And in addition to the cost of that too, right? The billions of dollars in costs. So it's a huge problem. There's a lot of initiatives that are going on around it. And back then, when we were starting this work, the organization, Dartmouth Hitchcock, as a system, was really not doing well. Our bundle compliance was 6%, which is really, really low, which means if you stack all of the 4 components of the bundle on top of one another, that means 6% of the time they were getting our patients that had recognized as a potential for sepsis, we're only getting it 6% of the time, which is really not good.
So there is a standard of treatment.
Correct.
That was already recognized in the industry.
There was.
Within healthcare.
Yeah, this 3-hour bundle, which meant basically time is life. You know, if you can get this 3-hour bundle, get these 4 components done in the 3 hours, you're going to significantly improve the chance of survival rate. And every hour, the number that always sticks in my head, every hour that you don't get the bundle in to the patient, your chance of your mortality rate increases by 8% every hour. So it's really very real and very time sensitive. Yeah. No, it's really not. And so we were not in a good place in terms of our performance as an organization. And so I was asked to jump in and be the lead on us taking on improving our sepsis performance. And it was a fantastic opportunity to work with an anesthesiologist named Andreas Tanzer, who is the organizational lead here. He's a physician here and was taking that lead with the High Value Healthcare Collaborative, which is the organization that our CEO, Jim Weinstein, had started up. And so what we did was we embarked on a journey to improve our 3-hour bundle compliance, and which would result in reducing mortality. And we were working with a really short time window. And so we needed to be aggressive, but we also needed to sort of plan out our approach on how we were going to do it. And so we started in the ED and moved into the ICU. And I led some rapid process improvement workshops in both of those areas. We got great engagement from both teams there, and all the while, too, really setting our sights on how do we continue to spread this to our inpatient units, and then how do we branch it out to our rural ambulatory groups and also our affiliate hospitals as well. And so it was a really great experience. And it's one of those where you mentioned, that there's a sort of recognized standard around treatment.
Right.
And that's true. And so if you think about, we were talking about the different levels of belting. This project was, when you think about the technical aspects and the processes, it's kind of a greenbelt project. Yeah. When you think about the change management pieces and all the things associated with that, it's a master black belt project. And we see that a lot in healthcare, where the technical pieces are not that difficult and not that
you know what needs
highly
to be done.
Technical. Yeah. The challenge is, how do you plug it into your existing processes? How do you make sure everybody's on board, because you've got so many different people touching the processes, and sometimes there's not even a process to plug into. And how are you gonna work it with a lack of process?
So in this case, it wasn't a question of we've got to come up with a new cure. It was we know what the cure is.
Right.
We just need to figure out how to
deliver it. Yeah, that's right.
Because it is a cooperative. Right. It's a team sport.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and it became a real question of process capability, right? So if you've got 3 hours to get all this stuff into your patient, what's your capability to deliver anything you're doing right now in the ED or the ICU, right? And so if your door to IV time today is 5 hours, you're going to have a really hard time doing a 3-hour bundle on your patients, right?
When you say door to IV time, you mean from the time I walk in and say I don't feel so good,
yep,
to the time I actually
have an IV in your arm,
diagnose me, and then have me
exactly
in a bed
right.
and put an IV in my arm and start that bundle process.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was really around that, is what's the current process capability for getting fluids into the patient, getting antibiotics into the patient, and so that was really our focus around the processes for delivery. And so we started to do baseline work with the ED around just trying to get a sense of where we were at today. And so it was really exciting work. I mean, it was so much fun doing that kind of work. And then as we started to build momentum around the successes we were having and really looking at the processes and improving those processes, and that snowballed into work into the ICU, and we were able to see great success from it.
So backing up just kind of a step here.
Yeah.
Here you are, a chemical engineer with a background in supply chain management.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're working. So when you were here before, you were still, as you said, kind of still pretty much just on the supply chain side.
I was, but now
you're involved deeply with clinical processes.
Yeah, that started to happen. My transition. One thing we didn't touch on is in my first foray into healthcare, my first time at DH, the first 2 years I was inventory and logistics manager. The last year I took on supply chain manager for Periops. So that was much more closer to the clinical side because I owned the operating room supply chain, the outpatient surgery supply chain.
Okay.
But I added central sterile reprocessing, which is all instrumentation, disinfection, all of those different pieces. So when I left DH the first time, at that time I was the owner around standards for disinfection across the DH system. So that was my first foray, getting much closer into the clinical side.
But even there, you're providing a support process, right?
Yep.
So is the equipment coming back? Is it in a timely manner? Is it?
Right.
Is it?
Are we maintaining standards? Yes,
right.
exactly.
But now you're actually talking to physicians and nurses and
very
about
true.
what they actually do.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's
true.
different. To me, at least, that's different.
It is. You're right. And it's interesting you say that too, because I did find myself saying more of, look, I'm not clinical, right? Because there were more times when I get where I get pulled into. Yeah.
What's that like as a non-clinician? So we joked a second ago about not being neither of us is a clinician. We both worked in healthcare for a while. So what's that like trying to step into a process that is clearly a clinical process?
Yeah.
Now you're not just making sure that they have the materials they need to do what they do. You're actually talking about what they do.
Well, yeah. So what I would say is that it's knowing what. How do I describe this? It's going into those discussions, knowing what I bring to the table and knowing what they bring to the table, right? So I am not the one there that's going to tell them how to treat their patient, how to do this. I am the one that's there to help them think through, how do I make sure that you're going to be able to get your antibiotics when you need them and where they're going to be, and we've got the right process in place in order to deliver that, right? Again, so it's much more on the service side. But this is your point is well taken, because it's an inherent challenge that I think we have as a continuous improvement sort of practitioner of how you work with clinical folks, right? And it really becomes defining what the roles are and what I bring to the table versus what the clinician brings to the table, and how do we make sure we maximize sort of the highest level of knowledge there in order to have the right outcomes and improve the process.
So you were very successful with this process. What was the end state with the sepsis project?
So we ended up cutting our mortality by over half. So that translated into that when you say 50% reduction in mortality, actually I think it was more like 70% reduction in mortality what we ended up with. But it's like more than 20 lives a year saved with this work that was done. And we were able to do it in less than a year. And if you look at other organizations that were able to move their 3-hour bundle compliance from like 6% to 70%, it took them 5 years. We did it in 6 months. So it was pretty incredible work and outcomes that we were able to achieve.
What allowed that to happen?
So a combination of things. First off was sort of leadership clearing a path. I mean, Jim Weinstein, our CEO, was very much dedicated to making this a success. And so the high-level leader sponsorship was really important. My partner, Andreas Tanzer, having him there to be the clinical knowledge and to help drive things, as well as Karen Chandler from our quality and safety group as well, as bringing her nursing knowledge as well. So having the right sort of core group to drive this was really critical, so that, again, we could split up. We know what each of our superpowers is, right? So to speak, right? And so that was another piece. And then the third piece was having a plan and engaging staff in the right way. So we were really thoughtful as we thought about how we were going to move this across the organization. We started in the ED, but we brought in folks from the ICU onto the ED team. And then as we were doing the ICU work, we were bringing people from the inpatient side in, right? So sort of planting the seeds of where we were going to go next and thinking about what the challenges might be to move it there was really important. And then we were very generous with our information. We did a lot of what we did sepsis road trips and went to Wentworth Douglas and other hospitals to really talk about our successes and our challenges so that other people could learn from it.
So you had two rather quick promotions after you came back to Dartmouth Hitchcock. First from Senior Value Performance Specialist to the Director of Performance Improvement, and then to the Director of Operational Excellence. How has your role evolved, and can you talk about what is the Director of Operational Excellence role now?
Yeah, so I first moved into the Director of Performance Improvement, which meant that I ran the Performance Improvement Group. And so that is the black belts, but that also included our Value Institute Learning Center. So if the Value Institute had started out as just the programs of our green belt and yellow belt, and then it morphed into becoming really the name for the whole division. So as Director of Performance Improvement, I owned the Value Institute Learning Center, which was the training programs, but also the black belt team that was doing consulting, coaching, and curriculum development and delivery. And then with the operational excellence role, that added the project management office, which had been in the organization for a while, and they decided to combine it all under one role, which became the Director of Operational Excellence. And so when you think about operational excellence, I would define as having linkages all the way through from your strategic plan and strategy deployment all the way down to your daily management system and standard work associated with all of those so that you can execute against your strategies in a very real way and also see how all of those components are performing across the organization. So that's today what we're very much focused on is what are the processes, systems, and standards that are going to allow us to execute as a system now and into the future.
So what kind of role does your organization perform on behalf of the larger Dartmouth Hitchcock system?
Yeah, so really there's a couple of different things. So the first piece, if I think about what we're focusing on for FY17, the first is we're still very much involved in quality improvement and patient safety. So we have a lot of work going on around our HACs, our hospital-acquired conditions. So last year we put together a work group that had folks from my team and folks from the quality and safety team to reduce CLABSI, which is central line infections. And we've been able to reduce those, again, bringing to bear the Lean Six Sigma methods and the clinical areas of expertise. We've been able to reduce our CLABSI by over 60% in a 2-year time frame, which is pretty amazing improvement. We've spread that now to other hospital-acquired conditions work around C. diff and CAUTI, and somewhat in pressure ulcers as well, and we're hoping to get the same outcome of that kind of work as well. So that's one piece that we're really focusing on. We also have a new Office of Patient Experience that's been added to the Value Institute, so we're partnering closely with them. And there's two different ways that I think our group really accelerates improvement. One is by driving things through the Value Institute Learning Center. So for instance, we're working with the patient experience group around journey mapping. So building the capability around patient journey mapping, and that's really around what's the patient experience like for when they come to Dartmouth Hitchcock and flow through our systems, and where do we have opportunities to improve their total experience there, right?
So a journey map is how I interact with the organization if I'm a patient, from
Correct.
a patient perspective?
Yeah, it's what we would call a voice of the customer process when we think about Lean Six Sigma terms. But yeah, it's very much getting the voice of the patient as they go through and interact with all of our processes, people, and systems at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and what's working well, what are the areas for improvement, and how are we going to sort of continuously optimize that process and how patients experience it.
So observations from the patient experience office are cycled into your teaching here? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what we're going to be moving towards. Is we're building out a fundamental program around training to do patient journey mapping, and then we're going to be looking to integrate that into our yellow belt and green belt programs as well. Because and this gets into a whole other area that we haven't really touched on, but it's bringing to bear the patient's voice and patient's experience on process improvement work. I think there's a couple of organizations around the country, healthcare organizations, that do it pretty well. Industry my experience at Cabit, my experience at Timkin did it really, really well, bringing the customer to the table. But the challenge, I think, for healthcare is a patient doesn't know what's behind the curtain, right? They only see the front end of it. And so if I bring somebody like GE to help me with how I'm building ball bearings, or, they have a much different perspective and much different knowledge, right? Sure. It's very translatable, and they know manufacturing processes. The patient doesn't know what's behind the curtain. So how do we help the patient to think about things in a different way that we can really leverage it to do improvement work in the organization? And we're getting better at that, but I think we still have a ways to go.
Can you describe what are the subordinate organizations that or departments that report to you now?
Yeah, so there's three main components. The first is the Value Institute Learning Center, and that is again that's our curriculum development and delivery, and that group is mostly supported by our performance improvement team, which is the second group that I have, and that's around 10 to 12 individuals in that group, and these are our black belts. Doing continuous improvement and process improvement work across the organization. The third group is the project management office. And so these are folks that are senior type level project managers. And what I would say in terms of distinguishing between the two is when you think about performance improvement, that's where you have a project, you don't know exactly how to solve it, the root causes are unknown, and so you've got to embark on a process to understand root causes and then put in countermeasures to eliminate those root causes. Project management office is, I need to build a hospice, right? I need to implement some known best practice, right? So that's the difference between the two. They have their own set of disciplines and tools and templates that they're going to use. There's still going to be change management on both sides, but the needs are a bit different in terms of how they're filled for our customers. And so that's the distinguishing feature between the two. And those are the three key groups that I have.
And then patient experience, where does that fit in?
So that's still under the Value Institute. That's headed up by Carol Majewski here, and we all work for George Blake, the Chief Quality Officer.
Okay, great. I just want to ask a couple questions about quality for a second. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between Six Sigma and Lean? Some folks I've talked to in the quality field don't blend the two together, but sometimes I hear about Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. So your program, I believe, is a blended program. Is that
That's correct.
So is there a difference, and what does that mean?
There is a difference. So when we talk about Lean, the first thing I think about is the 8 wastes, right? And so these are wastes of time, inventory. Typically, people say downtime, and each of those letters in the downtime represents a different kind of waste. And Lean is really focused on value creation, so eliminating the waste and maximizing the value creation for a customer. So when we talked about value streams, you might look at a total value stream and see how much time is spent actually creating value for a customer in that value stream. And Lean really focuses on maximizing the value add, and value is defined by the customer. So maximizing the value add in that process or value stream and minimizing the waste across it. So that's the Lean side. The Six Sigma side, to me, is more like the math side. That's more along the lines of statistical process control, bringing to bear how are you understanding the variation in your processes, how are you reducing or eliminating that variation in the processes. And that's really the math behind it as well. So you can say statistically that the process is in better control, has a lower level of variability. So the reason Six Sigma and Lean were blended is because it brings the best of both worlds. It's value creation, but then also the statistical process control piece that Six Sigma brings to marry those two. And our program touches on both.
So reflecting on your career leading up to where you are today, how would you say your previous roles prepared you?
Oh yeah, I think the preparation has been great, and that certainly hasn't been on purpose, but I think it's lended itself well in terms of where I've been. So I think early on, creating the foundation that I got in leading operator teams and getting the basis around continuous improvement methods and tools really helped. And then moving into getting this sort of the global experience I got with larger systems and networks really allowed me to think around how all of those interact and how they can't be independent because they're all affecting something else, right? And so then having those different components and bringing it to bear on healthcare, which is a really complex type of environment, highly complex environment, because patients inherently, I mean, humans are pretty complex, and then the processes and systems needed to heal them, there's so many different pieces to it that it is really complex. In addition to the fact that the environment of healthcare is sort of constantly changing, and there's new things coming out, and then there's payment models and all these questions. So you have all these different pieces that are constantly moving. And I think coming from places that have been complex in many different ways and being able to bring to bear that knowledge has been really helpful. I think also too, being more comfortable with ambiguity. I mean, that's something as an engineer that you're generally not not taught. Ambiguity is not a good thing as an engineer, right?
Right, sure.
And so I think my exposure and experience to all these different organizations and methods and models has really made me much more comfortable with some level of ambiguity as well.
What do you worry about as the Director of Operational Excellence?
Two things. The first is talent pipeline. I think one of the biggest challenges we had, I mentioned that we're sort of up here in the woods as an academic medical center. That means it's tough for us to get and retain talent. And that's a limited resource as well. So that's a number one thing, is making sure that I can maintain a talent pipeline to be able to support the organization. The second one is, are we moving fast enough and we're doing all of the right things? I mean, we've been on this journey in the Value Institute since 2011. We've come a long way and made huge progress in so many areas. But how can we accelerate it, and how can we continue to do more in light of, there's more and more pressures around cost and everything else, and quality across all of healthcare. And so that's the other piece I worry about, is making sure that we can keep up and building the capabilities in order to be able to keep up.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about leadership specifically. So what would you say is your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, so when you say leadership philosophy, it makes me think of a couple of quotes that stuck with me early on in my career. And the first one was, the purpose of a manager is to make stars, not to be one. And so that one has really stayed with me my whole career. It's really about building the capabilities, not only of your organization, but of your people, and getting them ready for the next level, and really seeding the organization to make it better. So that's one. The other one is just really around what I learned, again, with my first role as an engineer is, the answers, it's kind of like I think it's the X-Files, the answers are out there, right? The people that really know how to improve the work are the ones that are doing the work, right? And really being foundational on that around, trust your people to be able to improve it and figure it out. And sometimes they're going to need your help, and they're going to need mentorship, and they're going to need coaching. But fundamentally, if you've got the right people and you're growing them and giving them a skill set and coaching, they're going to be able to figure it out and move forward with it, and listen to those folks that are doing the work because they know, and they're the ones that are going to have to continue to do it after you're gone as well. So those are, I think, two sort of core philosophies I have around leadership. And then I think the other two, I think about authenticity and being authentic around who you are and what you're good at and maybe what you're not so good at, right? And leveraging folks around you to help you with those other pieces as well. And the last is certainly integrity. I think maintaining integrity throughout all of this, because there can be challenging times in any leader's career and role wherever you are as well.
Yeah. Who did you learn those values from, you think? Who did you observe?
So certainly pieces, I think, from my mother and father. I think also, though, early on in my career, I think about some of my like our general manager we had in Cabit, and some of the other managers I had in Cabit, particularly around authenticity and integrity, and doing the right things in the face of pressure otherwise, right? And so yeah, I think there's a couple of folks I think about it. The other interesting thing too is, just as much as I think about the ones that I learned sort of the positive things from, I think I have just as many on the other side where I don't want to be that kind of leader, right? The other folks that you see, the behaviors and other things that they've done or not done, that really show, boy, that that's a really killer for us as a culture, and that's something I don't want to be. And so I guess to your point too, the philosophy, right, is you've got to lead by doing. You've got to be the model for what is expected for how you're going to conduct yourself and what you're going to do for your organization. And that's got to be, because everybody's watching. I mean, when you're the leader, everybody is watching. And so you've really got to exemplify what it means to be that and do that every day.
So you've been in a managerial role where you have been overseeing other leaders for a while. What do you look for when you hire a leader? And what do you look for to when you evaluate a leader?
Yeah, so I think there's a first piece, right, is sort of the minimum qualifications around sort of some technical competency. If I think about leaders we have for this organization, right, so there's a minimum competency around the technical capabilities and understanding Lean Six Sigma and project management, all of those sort of fundamental skills, right, that they should have as the baseline. From there, it really notches up to comfort with ambiguity, facilitation, and soft skills are really important, right? So I mentioned early on around being able to really talk to somebody and create partnerships. You know, I'm an engineer, and if I think about an engineer's engineer, that's not what I really need in my organization. I mean, that means I've got a ton of technical skills, but I don't have the soft skills I need in order to be able to work with anybody from a nurse to somebody in central sterile reprocessing, right? So what I really look for with anybody that I hire into my group, I consider is going to be a leader, because they're going to be interacting across the entire organization with anybody from an executive VP to somebody who's floor staff, right? So they represent the Value Institute, and therefore, in their own way, they're a leader in setting the tone. And so the soft skills are really important, being able to work and listen and not being sort of arrogant in our approach, but really trying to figure out what the right approach is with anybody that they're working with.
Can you give an example of a difficult leadership lesson you might have had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, I would say early on, so this was when I was first a production supervisor at Cabit. We had an opening for a production foreman. And again, I didn't mention this, but Pampa is a pretty small town. I mean, it's 15,000 people in the middle of West Texas, and there's not a ton of extra talent around. So I made the decision to actually post the foreman job, and after consulting with our plant manager and others, they thought that was the right thing to do. And looking back, I think it was the wrong thing to do at the time. I know it was the wrong thing to do at the time, because it basically sent the message of there's nobody here good enough to take this job on, and you know, we've got a bunch of people covering the role right now as well, and none of them are good enough, right? And so it really it was something I had to overcome over time for making that decision, but I never forgot that decision. So
post, you meant publicly outside
publicly
the company,
post outside the company, yeah, exactly, right.
So that created,
so I posted it outside the company, and that was all over everybody around.
Everybody was talking about the fact that you didn't have faith in them. Is that what
correct
it was interpreted as?
Correct, yeah. Interpreted as that. And then in the end too, I got 0 candidates from the outside too, right? So not only did I do it, but then they turned out to be right?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's the real reason why I look back on it as a lesson learned, is really understanding what's the pros and what are the real pros and cons of doing this, and what am I going to get out of it, right? And so I think that was damaging to my credibility at the time. But of course, I was able to work through it and gain the trust back. But I think.
Yeah. Everything we do as a senior manager sends a message of some sort, intended or not.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. It's like I said. Yeah, everybody's watching, so that does send a message. There's no doubt. Yeah.
Where did junior leaders most often make mistakes, you think?
As I think about when I was a junior leader, I think one of the watch outs for junior leaders is to really understand if you're setting about on a goal or a journey, whatever you're going to do with your teams, making sure that you have the capability there in order to do it. I think so many times I see people talking about their strategy and how they want to execute their strategy without really understanding their capabilities and what they're really going to need in order to be able to achieve that strategy. And so really, you've got to do a deeper dive into your organization to really understand what's there for capability and where everybody is at, and not make too many assumptions it's sort of a higher level to think that you can just start on this strategy or goal and be able to achieve it. So really pressure testing and understanding what's reasonable versus what is really going to be pie in the sky. And that comes from having a deep understanding of your organization and the processes and the realities of that organization. And that's really important.
How important are professional associations for development, and which ones have been important to you?
Yeah, so I belong to a few different ones, and I think that they're really important to me because they provide an opportunity as sort of an outlet, right? I mean, you're going through your day-to-day work, and you can get so tied up in all of that. And having the opportunity to hit the pause button and step away and really learn something new, I think, is what the opportunity is with these organizations. And so that's how I've used them. And it's not only just going to training, but also just networking and talking to folks about it. I think one of the great things about healthcare is the problems are also similar for different healthcare organizations. You know, in industry, I can't go to my closest competitor and talk about how they're building something, right? But I can go to another hospital and talk to them about how they're dealing with sepsis.
The competition is geographic, so.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot more opportunities to share best practices and talk about best practices and do these collaborations. And so that's great. So the ones that I've used the most have been the American Society for Quality. I recently joined the American Conference for Healthcare Executives. I got it right. American College. Sorry, I literally joined it last month. So
awesome.
That's another one I'm really excited about, and I love the fact that one is not only asks folks to do continuing ed and to go to educational courses, but also pushes community involvement as well, which I think is fantastic. That's the only one I've seen like that does that, so that's pretty amazing. And then the other one that I have been a member of is the American Management Association, and taken some of their courses as well, and they really have some great programs out there.
If you had to pick one book that an early careerist healthcare administrator who maybe aspires to senior leadership should read, what would you recommend?
The first book that comes to mind is called Execution, The Discipline of Getting Things Done. And I don't know what year it came out, but that's a book that, to me, it basically talks about, it thinks about core processes around execution, the strategy process, the people process, and the operations process. And it's written by, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but one of them is ex-CEO of Allied Signal. And it's just a great book. I think, on my board here I have the 3 circles. I still use these concepts today because it really distills down in terms of when you're going to execute against something and how you're going to run your company, your business, your organization. To me, it's just so fundamental. And it does tie in, as a lot of the same pieces around Lean Six Sigma as well, some of the philosophies and tenets around that as well. So that's the one I would recommend.
Okay, great. We'll put that in the notes. So in closing, what advice do you have for early careerists who'd like to work in quality improvement and or operational excellence?
So I think if you have not had any exposure to quality improvement, I would, if you're serious about really finding out about it, I would talk to your supervisor, manager, your boss, and look for opportunities to get a yellow belt or green belt certification. Certainly we'd love for you to come to the Value Institute to do that. But, I think, starting off with maybe getting your yellow belt or green belt and doing a project and seeing if this is something that you're interested in. Some people do it and they enjoy it, but it's not really what they want to do longer term. We have others where, they drink the Kool-Aid and they love it and they don't want to ever stop doing it. And so those are the folks that end up maybe joining our team as well, because they like it so much. So I think getting some exposure, some real exposure to it and seeing if it's something that's of interest to you is probably the right way to go. If nothing else, you're going to come away with a great skill set and be able to think about things in a different way and help your organization as you move forward.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Health Leader Forge, a joint production of the College of Health and Human Services at the University of New Hampshire and the Northern New England Association of Healthcare Executives. Please go to our website, healthleaderforge.org, for more information or to leave comments about today's podcast. Look for Health Leader Forge podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and other podcast distribution sites. Thanks for being a part of the Health Leader Forge community, and we'll talk with you again in about 2 weeks.